Sorry for my voice going out, but I thought I'd do a fun video today as the Portland Retrogaming Expo is coming out in about a month, and I'm really excited about attending it. And there's going to be a lot of people there collecting for the first time. And I thought, you know what? I thought I'd do a video and share what would be the 5 video game consoles a new collector should think about collecting or playing today if they were to start now. And you know, I've been collecting a long time and I have many favorites. You're going to have your favorites. You might have things you grew up with. And so lots of consideration was put into these 5 that I chose. Now, they're not going to be your 5 possibly. You're going to say, well, what about this and what about that? That's okay. But I've been to many of these shows. I've been to every Portland Retrogaming Expo there was. And I know what's available there. And, you know, these are going to be 5 consoles that I think are going to be represented, and especially games and aftermarket as well. And so I'm going to talk about that. But yeah, if you're going to start today, what are the 5 consoles that I would recommend a new collector to collect and play today? And so first up, I'm going to go with the DS. And, you know, I have a buddy and he collects a lot of things, and he was looking for something new and cheap to collect. And he started collecting the Nintendo DS this year heavily because of the affordability. It's a huge library. Yes, there's tons of shovelware, but underneath that like top 10% of that library is awesome, and it's cheap, and it's everywhere. And you're going to go, if you go to any game expo, there's going to be tons of vendors that have DS games, and they typically all come complete. They have a really cool clamshell case, so it's fun to collect these. Doesn't take up a lot of space, and you know, while the hardware is getting a little bit more expensive, I think your money's going to go a long way if you collect DS, and it is my #1 retro portable pick for mainstream portable releases, as I think it's fun to collect and a great one to start today if you had to. Next up is one that, you know, I think it's overlooked a little bit, but I have to say the PlayStation 2 has an immense library, and it had so many releases, and it is relatively cheap to collect the games. And even though the hardware is getting a little bit harder to find, you know, picking up a Slim is still fairly affordable. And, you know, there's so many accessories. There's lots of things you can do. And gosh, the library is just so huge. They have everything from great compilations. I've done a video on that. Everything from, like, you know, that, you know, even though it's getting older and it's over 20 years old, it's still, I think, relatively fun to pick up and play. And, you know, it was on the market a long time. And, you know, the greatest hits releases, everything from RPGs to action to puzzle to platform to sports. And, you know, I think there's just a bunch there that any collector, no matter what type of game that you're into, you're gonna dig in and you're gonna find it there. Now, flash back to 16-bit era, and I gotta go with the Sega Genesis. Sega Genesis is near and dear to my heart. And the reason why I picked the Sega Genesis is I think it's a little bit cheaper to collect versus Super Nintendo. Now, the Super Nintendo, I think, had better RPGs, and there's things that the Super Nintendo offered that the Sega Genesis didn't. But there's many games, if you compare them 1-to-1, they are a little bit cheaper on Genesis. Now, Genesis has risen in price, but I still think you can find some great deals there. Lots of people are still offering classic Sega Genesis games. There's aftermarket games for the Sega Genesis. The homebrew scene is definitely something that I recommend you looking into further, as you know, it's near and dear to my heart. It's got an amazing library, and I definitely think it's well worth to be on a top 5 list. As you know, Sega's rolling out the Sega Genesis 2 Mini, and I think that that's definitely going to fuel people to want to pursue and get some of the original releases. And there's going to be a ton at expos, and I do recommend it, as there's many games. I've covered many of the Sega Genesis games in my ranking videos on my channel, and you can check them out and see if it's for you. Next up is the Nintendo Entertainment System, the original NES, for many reasons, as I still think it is affordable if you go with loose carts. Even though some of the box games are super expensive, it has clone hardware. There's many aftermarket games released for it, and it was well represented. It was, the classic Nintendo system, and it really just launched Nintendo into the stratosphere, put them on the map, and there's so many great games. Now, collecting for the Nintendo is super wide. You can go high end, but if you're on a budget, you can still find cheap games, loose especially, for this classic console, built like a tank. It doesn't have any moving parts, so you can fix these relatively easily. You can still find them working, and as I mentioned before, that controller is so classic and iconic. So many people grew up with it, and there's so many great games that I remember growing up and playing, and many vendors are going to carry games for this classic console, especially here in the States. And so it is very popular. There's a lot of collectors for it. Well, and that's the other thing too. If you're new to collecting any of these, you're going to have other fellow collectors help you out. I know for myself, when I started, I had other collectors help me and give me information on what to collect for. Now, I've covered Nintendo on my channel. I covered what I recommend collecting for. You may want to check out those videos. Last and definitely not least is the Atari 2600. And you're probably wondering, man, that's old. Why are you recommending that? I'm recommending it because I think for classic video games, that early era, I think it does it the best. And it represents classic gaming. And you may be an older collector, and I definitely recommend checking it out. I do wish there was more hardware options for modern ways of hooking it up to a TV. But if you're, just playing on an old CRT or want to go old school, look no further than 2600. Now, the main reason I put it on here as one of the top 5 I would recommend collecting is the aftermarket scene. Atari Age has a tremendous amount of support for this classic console. There's tons of aftermarket and homebrew games coming out all the time. People are really pushing that hardware to the max. And if you're looking for a quick pick up and play type of gameplay, look no further than the 2600, as I really think it represents the era well. Now, maybe you grew up post Nintendo, then it might not be for you, but I do think the 2600 still is one of the top 5 consoles to collect. It's built like a tank, tons of products for it, great game library support. You can get games cheap, especially loose, and collectors are more than happy to help you out. If you go on Atari Age, you go on the forums, you can find a wealth of information about this console, and other people are going to help you collect for it and play and choose games that you like to play. So those are my top 5 consoles I recommend a new collector to start with. What do you think? I know your list may be different. In the comments below, put your list, as I want to hear your top 5 and why. And there's many factors of why I chose these 5. Affordability, availability, and these 5 consoles are going to be well represented at the upcoming Portland Retrogaming Expo. And I look forward to seeing you there. This is the Immortal John Hancock. You have a good day. Let's keep it positive. You take care.